Hola. How is everybody? Welcome, welcome. I'm taking on a big talk tonight. Surprise, surprise, it's Sunday night, but I thought I might get some more viewers. We're going to cover a whole lot. So I'm going to hang in here for just a couple minutes, see who comes in, and then I'm going to get going because I've got a lot to cover, and I'm sure people will come in. I'll check it out here. Hopefully we start to see some people moving in. Let's see here. Let's go. All right. Okay, well, I see one. That's good. I'm not seeing you over here. Go in the other format tonight. We're talking about human rights tonight. And this is a big topic. I have been researching like crazy all weekend, trying to put this together. And it's a lot. But I'll wait another minute or two, and then we will hop to it. Yeah, they're not liking that I'm getting on here a little bit more, so the shadow banning is definitely taking effect. The fact that I am up here is a good thing, so we'll just take what we can get, and people can catch up. I have been working very hard on my private Telegram channel at Agenda 2030 Decoded. This weekend, and in recent weeks, really going through the history of the world and putting together the pieces in which we have been misled. And in educating about UN Agenda 2030, it's important to go back. And that's what we're going to do tonight in revisiting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights with the United Nations. So that's the topic tonight. See a couple in, that's great. Hi Lee, how you doing? We believe in the West that our human rights are stamped and signed, sealed, delivered. But unfortunately, we would be mistaken. Yes, we would. Now, in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Hi, Kristen. Hi, Jason. I'm doing good. That was a resolution for that declaration went through the United Nations. The United Nations was established in 1945, right? Okay. Well, now what I'm going to do here, I went back to learn a little bit more about how that actually went down. So let me get to my drafts here, because I'm actually writing this into a larger article as well. But back then, there were only 58 member countries in the UN, okay? Because it just started in 1945, okay? Now, that resolution, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, was drafted and it was voted on. Now, out of those 58 nations, it was 58, yeah, member countries, only 48 voted for it, okay? These countries abstained, and that was Belarus, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Soviet Union, Ukraine, Yugoslavia, South Africa, and Saudi Arabia, okay? You'll hear me talking a lot about Saudi Arabia. Now you got to understand, Islam plays the long game, and you're going to see that tonight in my presentation, okay? So they abstained. Honduras and Yemen were just absent, so they didn't vote on it. In any case, because it was a majority, the resolution was brought forward as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, the thing is, it's never been legalized. No. You see, we're all under the assumption in the West that this is signed, sealed, and delivered, but it's not. It never has been. And it's been a big holdup from Islam, a 77-year holdup, because they have been trying, the UN and the NGOs have been trying to negotiate how the Islamic nations are going to join our version. And as a result, what our nations, our respective nations like Canada, US, UK, around the world, our human rights are based on this resolution that is not legally binding. It's non-binding. So remember when the pandemic happened? Well, of course, our human rights went right out the window, didn't they? Well, as we proceed tonight, you're going to see why. Hi, Christine. Josette. Luna Light. Shine bright. I love it. Mike, nice to see you guys. Okay, now, I thought first, I came across a little excerpt with Tucker Carlson. Mr. Freedom of Speech, right? Okay. And as we get into this, I want to lay this out so you can start to see the co-opting. Okay. So this is a piece from the World Government Summit that just happened in Dubai. And Tucker Carlson is interviewing a member of the royal family, okay, of the UAE. So let's just listen to this little piece. And you're going to see what I mean by controlled opposition. Because as far as I'm concerned, Tucker Carlson is actually in on the rebranding of free speech. And you're going to hear why. Okay.
So I'm from a country with guaranteed free speech. It's really the basis of our government. It's the First Amendment to our Bill of Rights, our founding document. And so I've always looked at monarchies, any kind of monarchy, including the British monarchy, no offense, as a place where people are not free to say what they think. And yet I have, having spent an awful lot of time here, always felt free to express my opinion. And there is a spirit, I'm sure there are areas that are off limits. I haven't noticed them yet. People, you do get a feeling that people kind of say what they think here to a greater extent than they do in, say, Paris or London. What is that exactly? Or am I imagining that? No.
Okay, I'm not going to play what he has to say. I wanted you to hear that because Tucker Carlson is basically saying, well, I've been here. I've spent a lot of time here. And actually, if you listen to him through the World Government Summit, he's spent a lot of time in the UAE, okay? And, I haven't noticed that you can't speak freely here. Well, he claims he's a journalist. A lot of people think he's a really good journalist. Well, anyone can do a Google search. It takes about 2 seconds, and you're going to come up with Freedom House. And here, you're going to hear about free speech in the UAE. Internet freedom in the United Arab Emirates remains significantly restricted. Online censorship is rampant, and the online media environment lacks diversity. Government surveillance of online activists and journalists is pervasive and has forced internet users to extensively self-censor. Authorities and government supporters continue to use increasingly sophisticated technology to spread disinformation that advances pro-UAE domestic and international narratives on social media. During the coverage period, social media users were arrested or fined for their online posts. Now, that's pretty damning, isn't it? Yeah, because they're well known to be repressive. So here you've got Tucker Carlson sucking up to the royalty of the UAE And this is how you know these guys are on Team UN, okay? United Nations, Agenda 2030. They're on the team of refashioning our free speech to align with theirs, with their version. Now, their version of free speech, which they call free speech, is, well, it aligns with the Sharia, okay? Now, getting back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, what happened, although the Muslim nations at the time in 1948 actually worked together with Westerners to construct our version of our human rights, well, Saudi Arabia abstained, of course, and it was resolved in the UN that that would be the declaration. But it's nothing more than a declaration, okay? Nothing more. It is non-binding. But what I think is they participated, just like they participated at the planning table of UN Agenda 2030. Well, it's to find the loopholes. That's how you do it, right? If you're part of the construction, you know how to take it apart. And now you're going to hear why. Now, I came across a beautiful article, and it's long, guys, so bear with me here because this is super important. But this is from the Brookings Institute, okay? And what they're talking about is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation's Declaration on Human Rights, Promises and Pitfalls. Now, here's the thing. In 1990, so 1948, ours is established, what we go by. In 1990, they come up with, the Islamic nations come up with what they called the Cairo Declaration. And this is what you're going to hear now. So I'm just going to start here. And I'm going to take excerpts, and what I will do is I will leave this in the description when I'm done. So you can actually go to the article and read it for yourself, because I'm not going to read the entire thing. It's pretty long. But we'll just start here. Okay, the United Nations set the international standard for basic human rights by adopting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. It further elaborated on this document through major conventions such as the 1966 International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights and on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. In addition to these global initiatives, complementary declarations were developed by regional organizations, including the Organization of American States, Organization of African Unity, Council of Europe, under the umbrella of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, formerly the Organization of Islamic Conference. Muslim states revisited these concepts in the 80s to draft their own instrument. Okay? Because they don't align with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They don't. Okay? The culmination of such efforts was the 1990 Cairo Declaration on Human Rights in Islam, which presented a set of rights informed by conservative Islamic values and Sharia or Islamic law. Within the instrument, the OIC laid out many of the rights of the UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. However, it neglected gender and non-Muslim rights, non-believer rights, okay? So basically, according to theirs, our rights don't exist, okay? Not to mention, the organization co-opted the language of Sharia in the document to empower states and ensure national sovereignty. After its adoption, human rights activists in the West and some in the Muslim world claimed that the Cairo Declaration conflicted with the UDHR. Well, of course it did. Yes, directly. Okay? So, in the early 2010s, the OIC began revising the instrument and introduced the OIC Declaration on Human Rights, ODHR they call it, almost a decade later. The document was scheduled to be approved at the organization's Council of Foreign Ministers meeting in April of 2020. However, this was canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Although the ODHR better reflects principles rooted in international human rights law, it falls short on issues related to family values, freedom of speech, and political participation. The evolution of the Cairo Declaration is encouraging. However, as it demonstrates the OIC's willingness to draw closer to the basic human rights standard of the UDHR, the new declaration provides an opportunity for the UN, Western governments, and human rights non-governmental organizations to engage in dialogue with the OIC over ODHR and UDHR's areas of divergence and to collaborate on points of convergence, such as prohibition of torture, women's rights, and the right to education to ensure that such freedoms are protected in practice. Okay, so as you can see, the 77-year holdup to a legal definition of human rights has been held up by these guys. Now, they established the Cairo Declaration in 1990, right? Yes. And in 2010, they began revising the instrument. So 20 years later. And now, it's still not done. Again, 77 years later. And as far as I'm concerned, this is deliberate. It is deliberate for this place and time in history. Okay, let's keep going. I'm going to move on. Sorry, guys, this is huge. I'm not going to get into this section, which is... Sorry, guys. Okay, the 1990 Cairo Declaration, a product of its time. I'm not going to get into all of the individual issues that led to that, but I am going to get... In addition to the above, the Cairo Declaration was a product of the rise of an Islamic perspective. In 1948, Muslim states representatives were active in the preparation of the UDHR, as I said, and other international covenants such as ICCPR and ICESCR. With the conspicuous abstention of Saudi Arabia, Muslim states joined the UDHR, and many also ratified the covenants, albeit frequently with Sharia-based reservations. Yet in the 60s and 70s, the tides changed. The politicization of human rights during the Cold War and failure of international law to deliver on Muslim priority issues such as Palestine and Kashmir, as well as the U.S.-Soviet support for various authoritarian regimes and interventions in the Islamic nations, often in the name of human rights, fueled the Muslim world's disillusionment with global discourse on universal freedoms. Okay. Now, one thing people don't know is that Iran played a crucial role in preparing and promoting the Cairo Declaration. Yes, they did. The Islamic Republic was the most ideologically driven Muslim country and championed its post-revolutionary political system as ideal for other OIC states. All right. Now we're going to get down to the beef, and that is Sharia, sovereignty, and human rights. In the 1990 Declaration, the OIC laid out many of the rights articulated in the UDHR. Indeed, the organization defended the preservation of human life, the protection of one's honor, family and property, and upheld the human right to education and medical and social care. Yet it did not commit to individual equality and non-discrimination, especially on issues related to gender and the rights of non-Muslims. Okay? From an international human rights perspective, the OIC stirred controversy because the Cairo Declaration claimed adherence to Sharia. Now, as a life system, Islam, it's an ideology, so it's a life system. It's bound to the Sharia, okay? So the Western perspective is expecting them to separate. Well, that's not going to happen. It never will. But you're going to see what I mean as we go through. From an international human rights perspective, the OIC stirred controversy because the Cairo Declaration claimed adherence to the Sharia. In the preamble, it was stated that the fundamental rights and universal freedoms are an integral part of Islam, and that such are binding divine commandments revealed to the Prophet Muhammad in the Quran. The centrality of Islamic law is clear from the Declaration's articles. Article 22 stated that everyone shall have the right to express his opinion freely in such a manner as it would not be contrary to the principles of the Sharia. Article 12 affirmed that every man shall have the right within the framework of the Sharia to free movement, although nothing is said about every woman. Finally, Article 25 further made Islamic law supreme by declaring it the document's only source of reference, because it would be, according to Islam. Again, an all-encompassing ideology, right? Such shorthand and cursory use of the Sharia gave rise to important shortcomings. Firstly, the Cairo Declaration never specified what the term constituted. Like, it reminds me of somebody playing stupid. And this is why I'm saying I believe this is absolutely deliberate, all of it. Given the diversity of opinions on Sharia across time, between and within madhabs, schools of Islamic jurisprudence, it is impossible to know what rights are protected by the document. Moreover, limiting rights to a Sharia-compatible framework of values would render them meaningless to the comprehensiveness of Islamic law. For instance, Article 22 mentioned above guarantees the right to express one's opinion freely, so long as it does not contradict the principles of the Sharia. Yet because Islam is a religion known to govern all parts of a Muslim's life, this means free speech would be limited in all spheres. Yeah, no shit, Batman, right? You can see this really gets to me. Yet, because not to mention the OIC never clarified exactly what constituted a contradiction. Furthermore, several of the Cairo Declaration's articles violated international law. Article 10 designated non-Muslims to a subordinate status and prohibited conversion from Islam. In addition, the Declaration did not recognize freedom of assembly or association or protect women from discrimination. Indeed, Article 12 provided the right to freedom of movement solely to men, while Article 6 declared them as being the head of the household. Okay. Now, yet, by far, the Cairo Declaration's greatest shortcoming was its empowerment of states over individuals. In the modern world, governments of Muslim countries, especially Sunni ones, have increasingly incorporated Sharia into their domestic legal systems and subsumed it under their authority. In absence of an international body that has a final say over Islamic law's interpretation, the 1990 Declaration relegated human rights to the discretion of states. This was a deliberate choice on the part of the OIC, which sought to co-opt the language of the Sharia to protect national sovereignty. So, as you can see, the state rules supreme. That would be a totalitarian state, an authoritarian monarchy, like the guys Tucker Carlson is talking to, pretending that freedom of speech is all well and good in the UAE, when it's not. Okay, Cairo Declaration, reception and impact. In the 2000s, OIC bureaucrats and member states, the OIC is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, right, contended that the Cairo Declaration was a complement to the UDHR rather than a substitute. So now they're saying it's complementary. In an address to the UN in 2007, Pakistan's ambassador Masood Khan said that the legal instrument is not an alternative competing worldview on human rights. It complements the Universal Declaration as it addresses religious and cultural specificity of Muslim countries. Yet because several Muslim states maintained Sharia-based reservations to international treaties, the liberal human rights community, especially in Europe and North America, saw the Cairo Declaration as an intended alternative to the UDHR, which OIC states could use as ideological backing to counter criticism of their poor human rights records. The concerns of liberal NGOs grew in the early 2000s when the OIC began lobbying the UN to classify religious defamation as a violation of human rights. Muslim states tried to frame defamation of religions as a form of hate speech, which was already outlawed by the ICCPR. Yet liberal groups saw this as an attempt to co-opt Sharia and restrict freedom of expression on a global level. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. This is why they're dragging their feet, right? They're saying that they're not an alternative to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They're saying they're a complement, but they're not. This is the way in. This is the segue, okay? In 2019, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe adopted a resolution which declared that the Cairo Declaration and Sharia in general are incompatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. In addition, the resolution asked 3 Council of Europe members, Albania, Azerbaijan, and Turkey, all part of the OIC, to distance themselves from the Muslim world's instrument. In the preceding vote, Turkey and Azerbaijan delegations rejected the resolution while Albania did not participate. Okay. Most human rights scholars ignored the Cairo Declaration, and among the minority who studied it, views were varied. Some argued that the declaration contradicted the UDHR, while others thought it was useful in normalizing the discussion about human rights in Muslim-majority countries and societies. Still others called it a dormant document without an interpretive enforcement organ. Okay. The road to revision, the OIC Declaration on Human Rights. The OIC paid attention to the criticisms of the Cairo Declaration. According to a document released by the organization last year, it is recognized that there are obvious legal, linguistic, and perceptual gaps and inconsistencies in the Cairo Declaration, which require careful screening and review to make it more practical, representative, broad-based, and above all, implementable. So now they're talking implementation. This attitude reflects the process of reform that the organization carried out in the mid-2000s. Pushed by, I'm not even going to try to say his name here, who served as the Secretary General from 2005 to 13. The OIC adopted its 10-year program of action in 2005 and revised its charter in 2008 with changes made to reassert a commitment to human rights. During this period, the organization started to lessen the mention of Sharia in its human rights documents, referring instead to Islamic values more broadly. For example, in the Covenant of the Rights of the Child in Islam of 2005, the OIC invoked Sharia, yet Islamic law was framed as a broad set of values informed in the document and was not used to curtail universal freedoms. Having taken it one step further, the Plan of Action for the Advancement of Women of 2016 did not refer to Sharia at all, but mentioned Islamic values several times. It's interchangeable. For instance, the introduction stated through OPAAW, OIC is taking steps towards the eliminating of all forms of discrimination against women in order to reduce inequalities between women and men pursuant to Islamic values of social justice and gender equality. Now, just so we're clear here, in Islam, there is no equality. Men and women have specific roles. They will never be equal. They will not. And during the World Government Summit, they didn't have a forum on gender equality. They had a forum on gender balance, because that's what it's all about in Islam. Okay? Okay, so here we go here. The IPHRC led the revision process, and like other OIC documents, this was carried out in an opaque manner. A subgroup of the IPHRC commissioners drafted the revised version and presented it to the CFM, which created an intergovernmental group to finalize the draft. Once complete, the document was presented before the Council for final approval. At each step of the way, little is known about the players involved, as the members of both the IPHRC subgroup and intergovernmental group were kept private. Moreover, during the revision process, the OIC never shared a working draft to solicit feedback from CSOs, NGOs, or unions who are the most progressive voices on Islam and human rights in the Muslim world. The reluctance to work with such groups reflects many member states' hostilities towards them and the OIC's strong intergovernmental orientation. Yet the IPHRC could have used the revision process to cement its independence and strengthen its own relations with civil society. Because the OIC, okay, it's stationed, head office is in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Okay, again, totalitarian. It's not about collaboration. It's not. That's a front. Sorry. But when it comes to human rights, it is. Then they decide they're going to move away from Sharia, or at least the language, right? In terms of style and underlying philosophy, ODHR is more closely aligned with the universal human rights norms than was the Cairo Declaration. The OIC changed the title from the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights in Islam to solely OIC Declaration on Human Rights. This change signifies that forces within the organization have moved away from claiming to speak on behalf of the religion, emphasizes the OIC's intergovernmental nature, and better aligns the declaration with other regional human rights instruments. The revisions are also secularized the document by removing many of the references to Sharia and Islam, not all of them. These moves were simply token changes to appease the Cairo Declaration's critics, or attempt at self-branding. Rather, they reflect the ideological shifts of the Muslim world that began to take shape in the early 2000s and were intensified after the 2011 Arab Spring. The Cairo Declaration was a product of the broader influence of Islamists who saw Islam as the solution, and Iran, which saw political confrontation on wedge issues such as opportunity to assert its Muslim leadership. In 2020, however, the tides have turned against them. Islam has lost its allure in Muslim political thought, and Iran has lost its prominent position in the OIC due to conflict with the organization's current dominant power, Saudi Arabia. At the same time, moderate voices in places such as Turkey have gained influence. You see, I don't really agree with that, because they're all in on it. Islam has one goal, and that is to establish a global caliphate. We have to know that and understand that. They work together, hand in hand, to achieve that end. They do. Now, let's move on here, because, again, this is huge. Okay. In an effort to reconcile all three influences, the OIC removed the mention of the Sharia from operational articles, though keeping it in the preamble, and made further concessions to appease each camp. To ensure that states would still maintain sovereignty, the organization foregrounded domestic law. Moreover, it emphasized traditional values to please conservatives and provided further detail on the ODHR and UDHR's areas of overlap for the sake of the moderates. Now we're going to get to content, convergences and divergences. The whole idea here, and the reason for the 77-year lag time on formalizing our Universal Declaration of Human Rights, again, has been held up by Islam since 1948. That's pretty big, right? Okay. So, from what I see here so far, is they are looking to converge their version with our version. and it's happening now, through UN Agenda 2030. You see, we all have the same 17 Sustainable Development Goals, right? The whole world. It's being implemented right now. Now, how can that be if we have absolutely divergent ideas on human rights? This is the question that we must ask. And this is why politicians won't mention it. They'll pretend they don't know what UN Agenda 2030 is, but it is the sole reason for the chaos in our world. Domestically, internationally, it is its implementation. Because Agenda 2030 is the path to Islam, the ideology. Okay, let's go. Rant over. Okay. In setting the ODHR apart from the Cairo Declaration, the OIC removed the language of Islamic superiority from the preamble. A historic document, the Medina Charter, sometimes called a constitution, was prepared under the Prophet Muhammad in 622 AH and is referred to in the ODHR as the oldest human rights document in Islam to demonstrate the Muslim world's early recognition of basic freedoms. Yet the Charter, while ahead of its time in terms of pluralism and tolerance, is in fact not about human rights. Rather than specifying the rights of individuals as in a constitution, it is instead a treaty that focuses on the rights and duties of groups and tribes, including Jewish ones residing in Medina, and their commitment to collective defense. Moreover, unlike its predecessor, the ODHR places less importance on Islamic law. Indeed, Sharia is mentioned only 3 times and is framed solely as a set of principles that inform the instrument. The OIC offset this reduced emphasis on Sharia by frequently referencing to national law, emphasizing the primacy of the state sovereignty over universal freedoms. This change, however, renders the document meaningless in authoritarian settings, void of strong rule of law, and elevates the role of Sharia implicitly, specifically in OI states that hold Sharia-based legislative systems. The criticisms aside, however, the OIC drafted the ODHR so it draws closer to international human rights norms. For instance, the document increases women's rights, specifically through Article 5, which declares state and society shall take all necessary measures to eliminate difficulties that impede the empowerment of women, their access to quality education, basic health care, employment and job protection, and the right to receive equal remuneration for equal work, as their full and effective participation in all spheres of life. The article adds that women and the girl child shall be protected from all forms of discrimination, violence, abuse, and harmful traditional practices. Moreover, the ODHR does not establish husbands as the head of the family. Yeah, but the Quran does. See, this is, again, you can't separate Islam. Religion is a tiny part. But it's all hemmed in by the Quran and the Sharia. It is. It's one big ball of wax. It's inseparable. And this is what people do not understand, because we get a lot of immigrants from Islam that come to our country. And so we think they leave that at the door. Well, they don't. No, it's a life system. And it baffles me how the United Nations can't quite get their heads around that. The NGOs can't get their heads around that. How can we converge with an ideology such as Islam? Despite such advancements, the OIC still failed to comply with various international norms. For example, ODHR, like its predecessor, omits many rights, including the freedom of peaceful assembly and association and universal suffrage. This, unsurprisingly, reflects the predominance of authoritarian political systems among member states, rather than Sharia morality and jurisprudence. The document also defines marriage between a man and a woman and asks member states to protect family and marriage, thus demonstrating the conservative influences described above. The ODHR also falls short in the area of LGBTQ rights. In the UN, the OIC has actively argued that the LGBTQ community is not entitled to equality or protection from discrimination, and moreover, that LGBTQ claims undermine family values and perpetuate the Western liberal cultural assault on Islamic principles more broadly. With this emphasis on family and the traditional definition of marriage, the new declaration builds on this stance and will only strengthen the OIC's resolve in international fora. Not to mention, it will empower anti-LGBTQ groups in member states. These states are anti-LGBTQ. It is haram in Islam. And again, we are being, through UN Agenda 2030 and the establishment of a singular culture in which that document, those 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we are becoming part. All of us are following what is a new life system. This is what it is. And as I've been saying, Islam is behind it. And part of how they're doing it is creating a 77-year lag from the formalization of our human rights, in which we believe we all have, but we don't. All it is a declaration, a resolution. It is not formalized. Scary times, guys. And I feel for the LGBTQ community because they're not going to understand what hit them here. And they need to pay attention. Furthermore, freedom of expression is not included in the ODHR. The preamble states the need to protect the rights of communities and preserve their dignity and religious and cultural identity. This language in part reflects the OIC's concerns over Islamophobia in the West and its decade-long push to combat religious defamation at the UN. Yet the organization introduces restrictions to freedom of expression that surpass hate speech, stating that this right should not be used to violate sanctities of the dignity of prophets, religions, religious symbols, or to undermine moral and ethical values of society. A final distinction between the UDHR and ODHR is that, unlike the former, which requires states to protect human rights, the latter is filled with references to the responsibility of state and society. This combination blurs a central theme in modern human rights, as covenants and treaties assign full responsibility to states in order to ensure that people in their territory and under their jurisdiction enjoy universal freedoms. I see one question there, but how do we explain transhumanism movement? Well, see, people still think that the transhumanism is the linking of the human and the machine. It's not. It was this. Genetic amendments. Gene edits. That is the transhumanism. Yes. Transhumanism. A transgenic mouse has been genetically altered. A transgenic seed has been genetically altered. The mRNA technology is genetic alteration. So, in fact, that is the transhumanism. They've got us looking the wrong way on that one. Yeah. I covered that. I covered this all on my private Telegram channel. I could use some subscribers over there. There is a fee, though. Because I'm going like hell on stuff like this and making sure these documents are all there for review and taking us through all of it, everything related to Agenda 2030 and its implementation. The channel is called Agenda 2030 Decoded. $35 US, $50 Canadian for a lifetime subscription. It helps fuel my work so I can eat. I need my strength. Okay. Now, let's just keep on going here. Of course, I had this all mapped out earlier. All right, conclusions and recommendations. I'm skipping over quite a bit here. There's a lot to read. The ODHR marks an improvement over the 1990 Cairo Declaration as it aligns more closely with the UDHR and offers a contemporary formulation of Muslim state positions on human rights, though some fear that the revised instrument is simply its predecessor rebranded. The rebranding? They're masterful at it. Sorry. This deflects attention from the OIC's great progress. Indeed, the revision of ODHR demonstrates the organization's engagement with international human rights, responsiveness to criticism, and its willingness to move away from rejecting UDHR or co-opting Sharia to limit basic freedoms. They say that their willingness, okay, this has taken, well, now 15 years. 1990. We're talking 35 years here. So no, I don't see a willingness here. I see a dragging of the feet. That's what's happening. Moving forward, if the OIC and the international community seek to further human rights in the Muslim world, they should focus on implementation, diplomacy, and involving civil society. Regarding implementation, the OIC should continue to refine its human rights vision and, more importantly, move to implement basic freedoms with binding treaties and monitoring. It should also help member states build their human rights capacity. So, again, we are subject to them dragging their heels, and therefore we do not have, again, a legal definition. Just like there is no legal definition of ethnic cleansing, just so people are clear on that. I'll cover that another time. There isn't. There's no legal definition of it with the UN. There are no legalities against ethnic cleansing. You see, so many of us believe that the United Nations is actually here to promote the forward nature of the West, but in fact it's not. And that's what I'm learning more and more all the time. Very disappointing. But at the end of the day, for them to be lagging for 77 years on the legalizing of our Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in order to wait for the Muslim world to catch up, which they never will, because again, Islam is a life system. It is an all-encompassing ideology. The religion that we see, and as you can see in this article, they're trying to break up they're focusing on the religious aspect of Islam. It's minuscule. Islam is the Sharia, the Quran, and then other books that tie it all together. It cannot be broken. It can't. But here we are dragging our heels. And these NGOs approaching this issue from a Western perspective. You cannot approach it from a Western perspective. This is why I'm reading this to you, because I need you to understand the Islamic perspective. In order to understand what's happening now, we must understand that Islamic perspective. Yeah, crazy, guys. But I thought that was pretty interesting. Now, here's another thing. Okay, of course, UN Agenda 2030 being implemented. It started with UN Agenda 21 back in 1992. Okay, 2 years after the Cairo Declaration that didn't afford non-Muslims rights, or women, okay, that because that is stated in the Quran. Let's just be clear here. Non-Muslims are nothing. They're not. This is hemmed together. So a lot of people think that Islam, and because of this mass immigration, that they're giving up their values, but they're not. They're not. What's happening is they're imposing their values on our societies more and more. And we can see that. That is absolutely reflective in all of this new online hate speech legislation. Okay, online harms. Okay, Melania Trump has been working on that since 2017. She's been warming the bench. Canada, it's on the table. Australia, I think it just happened. New Zealand, UK. Now, that was majorly backed by the Muslim Association in the UK with a 60-odd page report. I featured it on my Telegram channel. This is how they are literally reshaping and rebranding democracy, free speech. And this also, it comes down to mandates for this. Now, what blows me away, in 2023, Iran was appointed to chair a UN rights meeting, a UN human rights meeting, 2023. This is when the women were burning their hijabs, right? And they were mass arresting them, torturing them, and executing them. They were literally chairing a UN meeting for human rights. This has got to give us more than an indication of how the UN is co-opted by Islam. And yes, they would be, because 57 nations make up the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. 57. See, we think the ones with the power are the veto power. That's how we've been propagandized. But that's not true. The OIC is the second largest intergovernmental organization. And they hold considerable power at the UN because they can operate as a bloc. 57 nations, that's a lot. Now, you start to add in all of those nations that Saudi Arabia is given billions. UAE, Qatar. Imagine the influence. Okay? So, they chair this meeting. Now, it's only a 2-day meeting, but what an insult to human rights. And yes, there was a bit of controversy, but it was over as quick as it started. Then, now, this year, we have Saudi Arabia has been elected the chair of the Commission of the Status of Women. Okay, a country where the guardian system is still alive and well. They're the chair of the Commission of the Status of Women by acclamation. Let's look up acclamation. Acclamation refers to a loud, eager expression of approval, praise, and assent. What? Where are our Western nations in standing for us Western women and our human rights? They're all folding. They are. By acclamation. People are raving. The UN. Human rights groups aren't. But if we cannot understand how co-opted the UN is with Islam, we better start. And it should worry the hell out of us regarding the implementation of UN Agenda 2030, a common set of values throughout the world. Yet they don't subscribe to our human rights. They don't. They have their own. kind of scary. Now here's another thing. Anything else, Martine? Where did I put that? Okay. During COVID, one of my first indications that Islam was heavily invested, beyond the mask, public modesty, beyond the 6 feet apart and the family pods, I started to look at like what nations, were seemingly not having any issues with the COVID measures. And, well, that was Islam, because it's not permitted, right? Okay. They didn't have freedom movements. Any back talk about wearing a mask. They followed their instructions to the letter. Okay. Now here's a little report, which is the Sharia Islamic Law Perspectives on COVID-19 Vaccines. And I'm just going to flip to the very, let's just start here. Okay. COVID-19 caused by the severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus ignited a pandemic in 2020 and continues to circulate. Elevations in case numbers, circulation of variants of concern, and potential variants of high consequence have alarmed the world. A coordinated global response led to the development of the COVID-19 vaccines in record time. Major vaccination efforts are now ongoing throughout the world. Unfortunately, uptake has been hindered for several reasons, including religious beliefs. This article will provide an Islamic perspective on COVID-19 vaccines. In Islam, every aspect of life should align with the Sharia, Islamic law, or God's will for humankind. The sources of Sharia are the Al-Quran, Islamic holy book, Al-Hadith, record of the words and actions, and the silent approval of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. To effectuate God's will, Islamic scholars provide their interpretation through the Islamic body of law called the fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, while Sharia is the decree of God. Fiqh is accomplished via analysis by ulama, clerics, or Al-Quran and Al-Hadith. Fiqh is neither sacred nor fixed, as it results from human opinion at a certain place and time and can be modified according to circumstances. Okay? Hold on here. When Muslims need clarity, ulama perform ittihad, best efforts, based on their understanding of Sharia, and issue a fatwa to address questions. Since fatwas are based on fiqh and alumnas on ijtihad, varying scientific background and religious experience of ulamas or authorized institutions may engender multiple different rulings on an issue, including vaccines. Okay, so they're not always 100% united, but I'm just going to get down to the bottom, and I'll put this link there too for you. We're just going to go to the conclusion. Whoa. Okay. From the Islamic point of view, preserving life is aligned with preserving religion. Muslims who refuse to receive COVID-19 vaccines may be regarded as acting against Sharia law. Yet halal certification is only one of the many issues that affect vaccine uptake. The anti-vaccination movement, concerns about long-term side effects, accessibility, and misinformation pose additional challenges. Effective scientific discourse and communication, including regular engagement with Islamic law scholars, alumnas, and national regulatory agencies will be critical for achieving vaccination targets. But as I'm saying, preserving life in Islam, okay, that is first. And therefore, this is why, and eventually, all of the fatwas that are issued will say yes to the vaccines. Now, they did, pretty much. Okay, so for example, here's what happened. The halal issue may pose a significant challenge amongst Muslim populations. Fatwa councils worldwide have used both Sharia and scientific approaches to grant halal certificates for COVID-19 vaccines. Yet, there have been inconsistencies across regions. For example, the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine is considered haram by the Indonesian Council, but halal by other councils. Nonetheless, all fatwa councils agree that vaccines are necessary in the context of our current pandemic, and thus receiving a COVID-19 vaccination is actually a form of compliance with Sharia law. Broader use of ACF reagents during the manufacturing may further increase acceptance among Muslims. So, even what's going on in the U.S. with, making vaccines safe and effective, it extends to the Muslim population as well. But what they're going to have to do is get everyone in line. Now, for example, in Saudi Arabia, it's the Hajj right now, the pilgrimage. And Ramadan just started, a few days ago. Now, in order to visit and do the pilgrimage, now they got 1.3 million visitors last year, Saudi Arabia, for the pilgrimage. They were obliged to have the COVID-19 vaccine. You have to get a permit to do it, and therefore COVID-19 vaccine was mandated. And in fact, they have quite a list this year of all the other vaccines you have to get. And a lot of the Muslims coming from, different developing nations, don't have all those vaccines or haven't had them before, but now they're having to line up and get all their shots so that they can comply with their obligation as a Muslim. They have an obligation to do the pilgrimage at least once in their lifetime. So that's it. We are going to their definition. We're going to their definition on free speech. We are moving towards their definition of compliance when it comes to the shots. And remember, during the pandemic, how the wall came at us, that we were endangering the lives of people because we wouldn't get that shot. How we were endangering the lives of those people if we wouldn't wear a mask. That comes from Islam, my friends. That's where the mentality comes from. Pretty crazy. It is very dangerous for the people. Last year, William, 1,800 people died doing the pilgrimage. And Saudi Arabia said that it was because they didn't have a permit, and they therefore could not access air conditioning. Yeah, that's how that one went. I imagine there were a few that died suddenly from the genetic amendment. We're not understanding. You see, when we see Islam in our Western nations, we're seeing, and this is why the powers that be are pushing this mass migration. And in my time of activism through social media, whenever there's talk about Islam, it's about mass migration. It's the exterior. In no discourse from any leaders in any of it are they talking about the Migration Pact, which is backed by the UN. The migrants, that are coming into these nations, originating in Africa, going to Europe, originating in Quito, Ecuador, generally, and going up through the Darien Gap, through Central and South America, Central America, Mexico, and to the U.S. That was all back-ended by the UN. They were giving what I called swag bags to all the people on their way, providing guidance. They were. That's documented. But no one wants to talk about the UN's participation in that. And what we see is, again, the expansion of immigrants in our nations, but we're not seeing what's going on behind the scenes with the UN. And as far as I'm concerned, when the United Nations is taking 77 years, dragging their heels to formalize a universal declaration of human rights, that is absolutely despicable. And it's being held up by Islam for a reason. And that's because we are tailing into their version. That is what's happening here. We know that very soon, the World Health Organization, the Islamic nations, I've heard it spoken about at the World Government Summit, where anyone talking like me about these shots, well, that's disinformation. Beheaded. Lose your platform. Because that is a ritual beheading. I mean, when you lose your platform, you are effectively beheaded, right? It's not going to be permitted coming up. And when we see guys like Tucker Carlson participating in it all, we better be damn worried. Again, Team UN. How in the world can we be implementing the very same plan that they're implementing in all their nations when we can't even come to a basic agreement on human rights? And in order to deal with Islam, we are going to be required to pull our definition in alignment with theirs. Because Islam is governed by the Sharia. That is just the way it is. 1990, they started with their version. 2000, 2010, 35 years? Do you think there's going to be a change? No, there's not. Dragging their heels for this place and time so that we converge into their definition. It would take an idiot to get shots after the evidence on the table. Well, in those countries, they wouldn't have any access to that information. They wouldn't. Even here in Mexico, no one talks about anything like that. I've mentioned the fact that I haven't had shots a couple of times, and I'm an energy person, and I can feel that energy of the back against the wall. I certainly can. It's something that was not disputed here. There are people, I've only met 2 in 3 years that didn't get it. Yeah, everyone else lined right up. They did. It's in the West that we are standing firm on, and again, I dispute anything being forced upon a population. I do. But in Islam, like, that will be seen, because their belief is that human life, okay, you would be a threat to human life. And that's exactly how the mobs that came after me were framing it, that I was a danger. Anyone who would not do what they were told during COVID and would not get that shot was a danger to society. And that, again, is directly from Islam. It is their mentality. It's where it came from. Pretty scary things. Yes. Any case, guys, any questions? I know it was intense. And again, I'll put all the information up for you in the body. I generally don't say anything as to what I'm doing in these talks, because it seems to get more people in and less shadow banning. I've known you since you started, right from the time you sat in your living room. Yeah, I was called to it. 2019, it was about the spring, really. And I just lit up again. I hadn't written, in 2000, I was publishing my magazine from 2005 till 10, and I still had my hemp food company at the time. Organic Lifestyles was the magazine, and they came for my head, destroyed my life. They did. it was when I started talking about natural immunity and really pushing the natural, and again speaking against vaccines, that my life as I knew it then ended. And it took me 7 years to start writing again. It did. I knew then freedom of speech was on its way out, but I was putting out 40 to 60,000 copies across the country, right? And I didn't like that. I learned, and I never thought I would do it again. But here we are, because 2019, I just knew Agenda 2030 was something I had to do. I couldn't get it out of my head. And then when COVID came, it was like, boom, here we go. This is it, Martine. It's time. And I haven't stopped since. I'm committed. But mostly to arming us with information in order that, again, do not comply. That doesn't address what's behind all this. That is a simplistic view of what's happening, a simplistic response. It's the response of a non-thinker. We are dealing with the most masterful magicians in the world. And until we can start and step back and take a look at where this is all coming from, this is why I spend so much time trying to translate this into a form that people can understand. We are nowhere until we can understand what's coming at us, how it's coming at us, and why. And do not comply is simplistic. We're going to have to get better than that. Do not comply can go nowhere when they are literally changing our laws. And that's what they're doing. We should be understanding how serious this is, okay? Because COVID was only, 3 years ago? Started 5 years ago. It went on for 2 years. People forget too easily. And this isn't over by a long shot. That was just the beginning. That was just the appetizer. We're getting on to the main course now. And it's going to be a literal reconfiguration of our world. I think we need to understand all of it much better than we do now. And do not comply does not address the absolute masterful nature of how this is coming together. And don't think, I respect the mastery of the manipulation. I don't respect them. I don't respect psychopaths. I do not respect duplicity. But we have to stop thinking that these guys are a bunch of idiots, because I see that in social media all the time. No, they are not. People that are saying that are disarming our defenses. We need defenses up. And as this comes down, we're going to have to get a little bit, a lot more serious if we're going to have any defense at all, right? We need to learn our rights. But again, when we all seemingly believe that this universal Declaration of Human Rights is stamped in stone, it's not. It's not. It has as much power as the Islamic version currently. It does. And there is only one reason to drag your heels in not ratifying this and not legalizing it. It's that it will be altered. And again, we will be converging with their version. And we're not going to like that one bit. We're not. They can say that they are modernizing. In Saudi Arabia, again, they threw the women in jail that started the We Want to Drive campaign. A week after MBS legalized women driving, he threw the activists in jail to get them out of the way. Women are used in those cultures. They are pushed forward to forward their ambitions. But all you have to do is look online and you can see there's no women in sight when there is a government decision. It doesn't apply across the board. They put the princesses up there, the shikas, not the common woman. Yet, every financier is in there. Trump is taking money. Georgia Maloney. Greece is taking money. African nations are taking the money. All from Islam in the form of development funds. The entire Caribbean, Canada, UK, of course. I mean, the Qatari royal family owns more than the British crown by themselves. We don't understand the lay of the land, and we have been furnished with a misconception of the lay of the land. The kings and sheiks of the Middle East are in control of this one. And again, they're dragging their heels so that the rest of us will be complying to their version. That is the idea. And that's why I thought this was really important to get out immediately. Any questions, guys? I know that was a little intense. You have to no one talks about this, mostly because most people aren't looking at this picture from an Agenda 2030 perspective. But when you're looking at implementing a global culture in 17 Sustainable Development Goals in which everyone is to comply, and Iran has the same version as we do, yet they don't have the same human rights. Well, that just doesn't make sense, does it? It says that they have no intention. And therefore, it makes Agenda 2030 completely disingenuous. So while here we are implementing in our respective Western nations and complying, they're not with our version. And I found it interesting that the Canadian government was giving, it was millions of dollars to the Iraqi government in order to further their sustainable development and gender equality. That was in March of 2024. And just recently, a month ago, in Iran, they passed a law so girls as young as age 9 can be married off now, legally. So our Canadian government is supporting that, right? Of course, DOGE, another sustainable development endeavor, has unearthed that American taxpayers have been supporting the Taliban. This doesn't make sense, does it? That's because they're all in on it. And they know exactly what side of it's all about the money. And the more Islam invests into our Western nations, and they are, well, the more intrinsically linked we are. They're not going to change. They may for a bit, but hey, we know what happened in Iran. I mean, in Iran, it was in 1979, women were amongst the most fashionable in the world. And overnight, they were under the veil, the burqa, to never be seen again. In Afghanistan, while the Americans were there, yes, girls were going to school. It had lightened up. There were, fashion was coming back. There was advertising, like in these countries in the developing world, like they paint images and murals, right? On buildings rather than having, the prefab stuff that we stick up. And when the Taliban came in, the first thing they did was they stopped the girls from going to school. They removed any imagery of women. It just happens like that. And for us to believe that that can't happen to us, particularly when we are venturing into global governance, because that is what Agenda 2030 and Agenda 21 is all about. Will it happen in my lifetime? I don't know. But if you have daughters, it's going to happen in theirs. This is what we must understand. I keep starting and stopping here. Yeah, because they like to cut me off. But I will put this on YouTube too, guys. I will. 90% of the people here in the States have a hero of what most think is a savior. Yeah, that's what's happening in Canada too. It's happening all over. People think they have a savior. Elon Musk is going to rescue free speech. No, he's not. He's beholden to Islam. His second largest shareholder in X is Kingdom Holdings of Saudi Arabia. He could never have bought X, or formerly Twitter, without them. And they were shareholders before in the old Twitter because they like to play both sides. They have a hand in our social media. They have a hand in the censorship, and they most certainly had a hand in the censorship during COVID. Alphabet, Google, they're investors. Saudi Public Investment Fund. Facebook, Saudi Public Investment Fund. We are subscribing to their version of free speech already, and yet we don't even understand it. Crazy times. In any case, guys, I think that's probably enough for today because that was a lot. But thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. And again, think about joining my private Telegram channel. It's $35 US, $50 Canadian for a forever subscription. And I'm working all day, every day, just educating. History lessons. We've got all sorts of lessons. And again, the official documentation, which is so important right now. To be able to look through these PDFs and reports at your leisure. It's a lot easier to follow. And I do create a storyline every day, bringing people a little closer to understanding what's happening without this bombardment of material. You're going to see a whole lot different perspective on my channel than you'll see anywhere else, because I'm covering the areas that we need to understand, and a lot on Islam. It's important. Have a wonderful night, everybody, and thanks so much for being here. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.